Welcome to this deep dive. We've got quite the collection here today. A really fascinating set of early poems, notes, fragments from Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Yeah, it's quite a mix. It really gives you a window into his formative years.
Absolutely. And it's not just the polished final versions. We're talking school exercises, personal notes, bits of political commentary, even the seeds of those big fantastical poems.
Exactly. Stuff spread across different manuscripts, early publications, some things not published for ages.
So the plan is to really unpack all this,
Yeah.
pull out the key insights, the interesting bets and try to, well, get a handle on his early creative world and the times he lived in using his own words and the context these sources give us.
It's like seeing the foundations being laid, before the big famous works.
Okay, so where do we start? Right at the beginning seems logical. The sources mention school exercise from, what, 1787? He was only 15.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is his own take on it later. He basically says it contains nothing that any clever schoolboy might not have written, calls it just a putting of thought into verse.
Huh. Pretty harsh on his younger self. It sounds like he saw it as just, well, a technical task, not real poetry.
Right. But then you look at the footnote, and this poem he dismissed, it wasn't actually published until 1893.
Wow, over a century later. So even the stuff he thought little of, it stuck around.
Exactly. It tells you something about preservation, how things resurface. And we see other early dated poems, too, from 1789, 1790.
Like The Nose, which the note says wasn't published until 1834. That's a long time.
A very long time. And Destruction of the Bastille, which links back to his time at Christ's Hospital, the school.
Yeah, some notes mention the Christ Hospital MS.
So these early pieces had their own histories, didn't they? Not just written and immediately out there.
Not at all. Circulating, maybe, kept in notebooks, published much later, gives you this layered perspective.
Now, moving into the emotional side of things, revealed in these sources, some are incredibly personal. Grief, disappointment. It's quite raw. It really is. There's that poem from 1791, prompted by his sister's terminal illness. The line, pain after pain and woe succeeding woe, is my heart destined for another blow.
Oof. Yeah, that hits hard. You really feel the weight of that.
And you see this theme of loss, of hopes being crushed early on. Another line that stands out is, disappointment poured the tear, or infant hope destroyed by early frost.
Such a powerful image. Infant hope destroyed by frost. Wow.
It ties into other things, too, like his long engagement with the Chatterton poem, the monody on his death.
Right. Thomas Chatterton, the young poet who died in poverty. The notes show Coleridge worked on that poem for decades, didn't he? From 1790 right up to 1834.
Yeah, a huge span. And he references Chatterton's persona, Rowley. But what's really interesting is how the poem changes.
How so?
Well, the later lines that were added, they broaden the scope. Things like friend to the friendless, to the sick man health, and the bit about grasping the patriot's steel.
So it moves from mourning one person to something bigger, like a call for social change.
Exactly. You see his empathy expanding, linking Chatterton's fate to wider injustices. And then there's the elegy for his friend, Reverend Smerdon, in 1794.
The one who died of a frenzy fever brought on by anxiety, according to the note.
Yeah. Coleridge writes about remorse, the poisoned arrow in his side. It's this intense glimpse into psychological pain.
These personal losses seem so central to his early writing, even for someone like Li Bu.
Right. The young man from the Pelew Islands mentioned in the 1794 poem, the note explains he died of smallpox in England. Coleridge writes, my soul amid the pensive twilight gloom mourned with the breeze, O Li Bu, o'er thy tomb.
So his empathy extended even to figures he likely only read about.
Seems so. But it wasn't all sorrow, was it? There are glimpses of hope, too.
Definitely. Like The Hour When We Shall Meet Again. The note says it was composed during illness and in absence. Just the title suggests longing, connection.
A counterpoint to the grief, yeah. And later things like love, hope, and patience in education. The dates show this range of emotions was always there, intertwined. Periods of darkness, but also these enduring threads of hope.
Let's shift gears a bit to nature. It features so prominently, but not just as, pretty descriptions.
No, it's deeply tied to his thoughts, his feelings, his whole inner world. Take the lines composed while climbing Brockley Coombe in 1795.
Oh yeah, that one. You get such specific details, don't you? The sounds, the sights.
Exactly. The songbirds, the cuckoo, these little plants he calls startling stragglers, the mossy seats. It feels very immediate, very sensory.
It really grounds you there on the path with him, but then it turns inward so fast at the end.
Right. Deep sighs my lonely heart, I drop the tear. enchanting spot. Oh, were my Sarah here? All that detailed observation leads right back to this very personal, emotional core.
That connection seems key, like in Frost at Midnight, The Secret Ministry of Cold.
Uh-huh. Nature working quietly alongside his thoughts, and gazing at the mountain, feeling it blend with his own mind, worshiping the invisible alone through the visible peak.
Nature is a gateway almost.
Yeah, I think so, to the spiritual, the intellectual. And Lines on an Autumnal Evening from 92 does that too, right? His eye following the fading light, shades on shades with deeper tint impend.
The outer world reflecting the inner mood.
Precisely. And he focuses on specific things too. The cuckoo, the nightingale. There's a neat little note about the nightingale.
What's that?
He calls it a merry nightingale, which, the note points out, goes against the usual poetic trope of it being purely melancholy.
Ah, so he's consciously playing with conventions even then.
Seems like it. And then you have the Aeolian harp, making that explicit link. Wind, instrument, thoughts, feelings, all flowing together.
So nature isn't just a backdrop. It's active, sensory, deeply connected to his mental life.
But he wasn't just looking inward or at nature. These sources show him right in the thick of the world's events. Politics, society. He jumps right in.
You see that really early on with Destruction of the Bastille, that line, "Go tyranny, beneath some barbarous sky thy terrors lost." It's pretty direct.
Very direct, celebrating revolution. And then there's Religious Musings, written over a couple of years, 94 to 96. It sounds purely spiritual, but it's packed with political commentary.
Right, he talks about war, oppression. The note even identifies the patriot sage he mentions as Benjamin Franklin.
And he doesn't hold back on criticism, does he? Calling out statesmen bloodstained and priests idolatrous. The sources are clear. The poem's apocalyptic imagery is aimed at the French Revolution and established religious powers.
He wasn't afraid to name names either, or at least allude strongly. Poems addressed two specific people, like William Godwin
Offered political justice, yeah. Referencing oppression, terror pale.
and Lord Stanhope. The note there even cites the newspaper The Morning Chronicle from January 95, giving real context for why he might be writing to Stanhope then.
It shows him responding in real time to political discourse and figures. The sources just present what he wrote.
And perhaps the most powerful example is the Ode on the Departing Year from 1796. That seems incredibly critical of Britain itself.
It is very strong stuff. The notes provide that crucial context, Britain's relative safety versus its role in spreading war. That startling statistic about how many years out of the last 100 or so were war years.
Roughly half, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the poem talks about the yell for famine and blood. It's chilling.
He also used these almost allegorical forms, didn't he? Like fire, famine, and slaughter.
Oh.
A war eclogue from 1798.
Right, personifying these horrors. The source gives their dialogue, and the footnote links it directly to Pitt's tax policies at the time.
So it's taking abstract political decisions and showing their human cost through these grim figures. Again, the sources just lay out what he created.
It's a stark way to make a point.
Okay, so from the very real, very political world, let's step into, well, somewhere else entirely. The mystical, the fantastical. These sources give us early glimpses of his most iconic work.
Absolutely. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, first appearing in Lyrical Ballads, 1798.
And the source material lays out all those unforgettable elements, doesn't it? The albatross, the ship stuck, the shooting of the bird.
The curse, the crew dying, throats unslaked, with black lips baked. It's incredibly vivid, almost nightmarish.
But then there's that turning point, blessing the sea creatures.
Blue, glossy green, and velvet black, yeah. That moment of spontaneous connection, I bless them unaware. It's supernatural, sure, but it's also deeply psychological. Guilt, consequence, redemption.
All wrapped up in this incredible story with figures like death and life and death.
Exactly. And then there's Christabel. The notes say printed later, 1816, but fragments were around earlier.
That opening, the encounter with Geraldine, the strange signs like the Mastiff's reaction, Geraldine herself. A sight to dream of, not to tell.
Sends a shiver down your spine, doesn't it? And there's that fascinating little note saying the story outlines were based on positive facts. Just altered.
Really, so even something that feels so purely imaginative might have started with a real-world spark.
Apparently so. Transformed, obviously, but maybe rooted somewhere concrete. It's a glimpse into how his imagination worked.
And we can't forget Kubla Khan, 1798, presented as a fragment.
Just those opening lines. The pleasure dome, the sacred river Alf. It conjures this whole world instantly.
And then the shift, the vision of the Abyssinian maid, the desire to rebuild the dome with music.
Leading to that final image of the poet, the creator figure with flashing eyes, his floating hair, who's tasted paradise.
It's pure imaginative power. These poems show a mind just teeming with these other worlds.
And beyond the poems themselves, these sources are great because they give us clues about his process, his craft, how he actually put things together.
Yeah, you see things like an experiment for a meter or a metrical accident.
Right. Shows he's consciously tinkering with the mechanics, the form, not just waiting for inspiration to strike.
And the notes mention his reading. Influences like Anacreon, Catullus, Lessing, Schiller.
Shows he's plugged into this wider literary conversation, classical and contemporary German writers. He's not working in a vacuum.
There are also hints of collaboration, or maybe assignments, like a note saying some lines were assigned by Coleridge to Southey.
Could be a joint effort, could be a friendly challenge. It points to that circle of writers interacting.
And what about that anecdote about the sonnet based on the house that Jack built?
Oh yeah, that's a gem. Apparently he wrote it partly because people were criticizing his style, that elaborate and swelling language.
And the physician who saw him said he was as sore as a boil about that sonnet.
Ha! Sore as a boil.
Yeah.
You can just picture it, can't you? Shows he wasn't immune to criticism, even if the anecdote suggests the poem was maybe a bit of a self-parody, drawing entirely from my own poems.
It makes him seem very human reacting to feedback like that.
Totally. And even small notes like the one on Psyche explaining the Greek word means both soul and butterfly.
Ah, showing his interest in the deeper meanings within language itself.
Exactly. Etymology, symbolism. And maybe the most obvious process clue is just seeing all the variations listed.
Right. MSO, 1796, 1803. Different versions from different times.
It really drives home that these poems weren't just dashed off and finished. They were living things, constantly being revised, evolving over years. You're seeing the work in progress.
So looking back over this whole collection, this deep dive,
Right.
it really takes you on a journey through Coleridge's early mind, doesn't it?
It really does. From that critical schoolboy assessing his own work through intense personal grief.
To keenly observing nature, then diving headfirst into the political turmoil of his day.
And finally into those incredible, unique, imaginative worlds he created. It's such a range.
These sources, the poems, the notes, the fragments,
Yeah.
they give you more than just the text. You get a sense of the struggles, the thinking, the sheer energy behind it all in those formative years.
Yeah, it makes you realize that the poems we know, the finished versions, they're really just snapshots from a much longer ongoing creative process.
Shaped by absolutely everything he was living through and thinking about.
And what strikes me is how those different parts of his life and mind seem to feed each other. You know that note about France, an ode linking thoughts on individual nature to society.
Yeah. How does something huge like the French Revolution echo inside someone's personal inner world?
Or like that anecdote about the three graves. How can a single idea suddenly hitting you have such immense imaginative power?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? And maybe that's the thought to leave you, the listener, with from this deep dive. How does one mind hold all these different landscapes? The deeply personal, the fiercely political, the minutely observed natural world, and the wildly fantastical.
Are they separate? Or do they constantly bleed into each other, shaping each other? Where does the outside world stop and the inner world begin in fueling that creative fire? It's fascinating to think about.